we're going to start to peel back that onion and figure out how to build that, while also leaning into the people that we bring on board early on to help them develop that culture.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy. And I think, I've already set the expectation that you and I, for every quarter, half year, a year, whatever our cadence is of annual goal setting, there will always be a culture-based goal. And
Mm-hmm.
there will always be items that we're working to improve, and identifying gaps that we have and where we want to be culturally. And without that, I think culture can often fall by the wayside and become a
Yeah,
secondary option. And
totally.
that then, leads to turnover and satisfied folks. And people are our biggest asset. And
Yeah.
I think it's important for us to just reinvent how we look at employee happiness and employee engagement.
All right, we're here. We're doing it. We're talking about culture today. What does it mean to us? What has it meant to us in the past? How are we building it? What are the things that we're thinking about as it relates to culture? Stacey, greetings.
Hello. I'm excited to talk about this. I think it's exciting to talk about it now in particular because you and I are about to bring on our first US based employee, and we want to do it right from the beginning. And we haven't fully defined it for ourselves. And this is us talking about it, about what we want it to look like, what we don't want it to look like.
Yeah. And it's fun too, because we were talking about it earlier from the sense that like we don't have it all figured out right now. This is season one, year one. We're going to talk through kind of what our vision for culture looks like, how we want to shape that, and then revisit this again in a year and say, hey, are we on track to meet the objectives, the goals, the desires from culture that we talked about? Or have we kind of been taken down a path that maybe was undesirable? But then also highlight the really cool things that happened in culture in the interim.
Yeah, or if our vision of what our culture wants, what we want it to be, has changed based on
Yeah.
things we're not looking at or thinking about today. I think culture is unique in that it's always changing. There's always different inputs. It's so dependent on people and personalities. And I think it's something that maybe some companies don't put at the forefront as much as necessary to maintain overall happiness in team members.
Yeah, it's funny though, because almost every company talks about their organizational structure. They talk about how important it is, and yet you still oftentimes don't see that connectivity of the culture that's defined maybe on their website and then how it actually operates in real life. I feel like there's a big disconnect there, particularly in the accounting circles.
Definitely in our industry. I think that's a good place to touch on of the different standards that are set across the accounting industry, particularly in public accounting.
So why don't we start there? Why don't we talk about our industry as a whole? You didn't spend time in public accounting, but I can give the perspective after 8 years in public, and kind of share a little bit about what company culture I experienced and how maybe it was different, similar than what you might see in most public settings.
Sure. Yeah, I did do an internship in public, so I got a good taste of the few months I was there too.
Life is good for interns. They're just trying to woo you to come back and take a full-time role and then beat you down to a pulp after you sign on the dotted line.
It definitely is better for interns than first year associates for sure. But I when I was at my internship, I remember I really wanted to do some sort of fitness program, get to the gym
Mm,
at some point during the internship over the summer. And there was a free program in Boston where you could go out and like meet at, I don't know, 6 a.m. and community meets, and they do this workout together.
sure.
And the timeline required that I would be at the office 8:45, 9 a.m. And start time was 8:30. And that was non-negotiable. Even though
Huh.
I was staying till midnight, I was,
Oh,
working all the way through, very willing to stay super late. But that was non-negotiable, and I still remember that to this day. That it was such a pinnacle moment in really me questioning whether or not that's the route I wanted to go.
Yeah, but at that point in time, remote work wasn't established, and so there were these expectations put on team members of you have to arrive at a location at this point in time. Generally, there was not that same expectation that you worked until a certain amount of time. It's just kind of a forever work, and especially as an intern, it's like, all right, how much you willing to put in? Because I'm trying to show good face to get a full-time offer, and
Mm-hmm.
you really put it in that environment in public, especially as an intern.
So, how did that shift for you, or not shift, when you went full time in the years you were in public?
Yeah, so transitioning from my internship, I knew that I wanted to work at a smaller firm, a regional firm, and so I joined a firm called Montgomery Kasha Greilich in Dallas. And what I didn't quite know at the time was how embedded in their the organization their culture was, and it was actually a really good experience. And so during busy seasons, we would work a lot, a lot. And I was at a point in time in life where that was, I say okay. If I reflect on that now, if I'm 23 today, would I be doing the same thing? I don't know. But we were working till midnight, 2 a.m. A lot of the time. And I remember specifically Tom Montgomery, who started the firm. He was walking around one night about 10, 11 o'clock at night because he was still working himself and leading by example. But he was handing out $100 bills to employees that were there at the office late at night. And as a staff, as an associate year one in business, you're just like, oh my gosh, Tom, the managing partner just handed me $100 for working late. I mean, he was making a lot more money off of that for me working late, but it was impactful to me, and it was just a good example as to how he valued people and relationships and the time that was being spent working in his firm. It's really, really cool.
Mm-hmm. Putting in the face time with these new year associates, and to whatever extent making them feel valued and
Yeah.
appreciated versus just a number in the staff book.
Yeah, the other thing too with that firm, in our audit department, we had about 60, maybe 75 people, and it felt like we were all on the same team, which is really important because it's easy to get isolated in audit, particularly at a really large firm where you only work with the same 5 or 6 people and you're not a part of the broader team within the firm. And so they did a great job of that in terms of during busy season having a ton of events and happy hours, and they would rally the entire firm on a ski trip every year. And so there were these culture elements that really helped us feel like we were really part of a team. And I don't want to use the term family because family is reserved for those special loved ones in your life, but you kind of get to the point where you spend so much time with people, you're just like, holy cow, like this is a major impact on me as a human being.
Mm-hmm. So, for you, which key pieces of culture did you pull out of that experience as things you want to bring into a culture that you're building and defining yourself?
Yeah, so one of the things at MCG that Tom led with was the value of relationships. And so his saying, his slogan, his motto to first years that were coming in through training was our mission is to be significant in the lives of others. And what I really liked about that was that it didn't matter if you were a first year associate, a manager, a client, a referral partner. The leadership from the top down was so baked into the organization that you wanted to create significance for others. And so the way that that played out in the firm was that everybody had value, everybody had a voice, and that I think was really well executed throughout the organization. I think that importance on relationships was something that was really something that I took away from that experience.
Hmm. And do you think, or how much of that do you think was driven or instilled by Tom himself?
Almost all of it. Almost all of it. But to that point, I think he in the early days of that firm, he was very intentional about bringing the right people along that could help take that idea that he had for culture and then start to instill it downward, because he didn't have anywhere close to the capacity to be able to embed this into every individual that joined the firm. And so it was really imperative to get the right people in early to help that culture pervade throughout the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I asked that because I believe that culture stems from the top. It's
Yeah.
whatever your top employees are practicing and preaching. That's what's going to drive the day to day
Mhm.
culture throughout the entire organization. How are you promoting people? How are you firing people? How are you hiring people? All of those little day to day decisions ultimately impact the type of culture you're building directly.
Totally, totally. And I feel like we're at a point now where we're having an opportunity to build it and to set that culture and to define what it means to us. And so how have you thought about that? How are you evaluating culture? It's a very ephemeral thing. It's something you can't necessarily touch or
Mm-hmm.
feel, but how are you thinking about culture building, at the junction that we find ourselves at today?
Sure. Yeah, I think, it's such a pivotal moment for us because when you have two people and you bring on a third, that can change the entire dynamic of the entire org. So
Yeah.
while for this first person that we bring on, we need them to be incredibly talented, good at what they do, good at accounting and finance. We also need to be able to be fully transparent with them, feel like there's a sense of ownership in tasks and willingness to contribute to drive that culture.
Hmm.
And you and I spend a ton of time on our values, and I think that really boils it down well. Of being a good neighbor, be a good person, shipping daily, and service par excellence. Um, I think for day one, it's a lot about the person and who they are, and the impact that they want to bring to the table.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point because every single time I've had an opportunity to hire somebody in my career, I've always kind of done that a little bit based on gut, but also I place far more emphasis on the human, the person, their character, how they approach work, their mindset, than I do their ability to generate financial statements. And like that's a critical part of the
Mm-hmm.
job, but also the humans that you're interacting with on a daily basis is what drives culture. It's not that you use the best technology or have the best product in the market. It's the people.
Totally. And it's not just how we interact with them, it's how we interact with our clients and the type of relationships we strive for with our clients, which, it's we try to be somewhat informal and relatable
Mm-hmm.
and approachable to our clients, and that's kind of the overall atmosphere we want to create. So there's that people person or people aspect, but there's also the environment. And
Mm-hmm.
I seek to be very intentional about how we build work life balance at our firm. And, we've talked to a handful, you and I, of not necessarily candidates, but people who might be interested in joining a longer term now at our firm. And a lot of it is, how would you instill a work life balance, or how are you managing that today? And it's not defined yet. And I think a lot of it is showing up for the team when the team gets to a point where we're either, whether it's a metric like billable hours, which we don't really do, but um, overall capacity, whether it's a number based or whether it's a feeling based,
Mm-hmm.
where plates feel full, onboarding is challenging. We need to listen to our team when they get to that critical point and provide resources that assist in balancing that back out. Maybe
Yeah.
that's hiring, maybe that's efficiencies, maybe it's support, maybe it's a system. I don't know, but that's our job to
Yeah.
step in and eliminate those blockers when the time is necessary.
Yeah, it's a good point to understand where does the friction lie in the firm workflows and processes, and then start to break that down so that it then alleviates others to best live out that culture. And I know there's a lot of firms out there that have like fully dedicated teams to onboarding because that's a very challenging time
Hmm.
to bring a client on board. Usually the time required is certainly a bit higher, and so other firms have started to hire just pure onboarding teams. And I think that that really removes the burden from the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month workflows of the consistent accounting team. That is a culture piece in and of itself, is identifying where does the friction lie in order to then make sure that everybody's living their best life.
Yeah, and then also, how do you accountants by nature, a lot of accountants have been in this industry for so long where they've had these experiences where they've raised concerns to their manager and they've been put down, they've been, I don't know, and something negative has happened in that experience. So
Yeah.
how do we kind of shift that, earn trust, and really build a culture where we encourage team members to voice when they get to that point and not be in trouble for it? Not that it's a
Yeah.
detriment to their work efforts. It's encouraged to be honest and open and vulnerable about where we are in our circumstances. Again, I think a lot of this happens over time with repeatable experiences, but um, I think where you and I will be up against that challenge of peeling back old habits and redefining what a positive work culture can be.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think when you look at the accounting atmosphere today in general, you have the lowest number of CPA applicants declining every year for 10 years, the lowest number of accounting graduates year over year for 10 years. And there's a stigma that there's just very little life in the accounting space. And that was a big reason why full send is what it is today, is that people are starting to see something a little bit different just through the branding and the virtual identity of the firm. And so now we're in a place where we've got to take some of the identity, take some of the messaging and our internal ethos and translate that to a culture. And we get the question all the time of, well, how do I know it's not just going to be the same? How do I know that this is actually going to be a culture I want to be a part of? And we're going to start to peel back that onion and figure out how to build that, while also leaning into the people that we bring on board early on to help them develop that culture.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy. And I think, I've already set the expectation that you and I, for every quarter, half year, a year, whatever our cadence is of annual goal setting, there will always be a culture based goal. And
Mm-hmm.
there will always be items that we're working to improve and identifying gaps that we have and where we want to be culturally. And without that, I think culture can often fall by the wayside and become a
Yeah,
secondary option. And
totally.
that then, leads to turnover and dissatisfied folks. And people are our biggest asset. And
Yeah.
I think it's important for us to just reinvent how we look at employee happiness and employee engagement.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too where when you come into a culture and environment that's so starkly different than where you've come, it takes time to unwind those habits that you maybe have built up over the
Mm-hmm.
years. And I remember sharing with you maybe a month ago or a month and a half ago, I took 2 hours personally during the traditional work day, 8 to 5. I took 2 hours out. I extracted that out of my calendar schedule to do something that I wanted to do that wasn't work related. And at the end of that, I said to myself, okay, I've got to make those 2 hours up tonight or early tomorrow morning before the workday. And it was just that moment of realization of like, wait a second, that's just an old habit that I don't have to replace those hours that I missed, because I never credit those hours back to myself when I'm working late at night. And it's just one of those things, and everybody has their own kind of unique work history, I suppose, of their work demons. But for me, it's just like, oh, I don't have to think like that. It's okay. But also still be very present and mindful of deadlines and supporting others when they
Hmm.
need me during the workday and things like that. And so it's not just go off and take a bunch of time however I want to. It's make sure that those around me are supported, but also don't kick myself when I'm not adhering to what the traditional work schedule may historically look like.
I wonder how many, not even just millennials, like how many people in the workforce think that way. Because I'm sure so many people can resonate with that mentality. Me too. Same.
Yeah.
I I felt physically when I was not sitting at my desk that I felt this like weight, this guilt. I could be eating lunch in my living room for 10 minutes and I would feel this weight. And at the office, if I were to go in the living room, to talk with folks, nothing work related, I didn't have that negativity because you're at the office. And I
Yeah.
think now with this remote work style, we're almost working more because there's not a lot of that impromptu, like, hey, let's take a walk with your
Yeah.
colleagues. And those little pieces are missing.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Like I do think, I mean, people are working more. They're at home. The access is higher than it's ever been. We've got everything we could possibly want on our phone, all the communication, access to a home office, which is, a blessing to have. But also it's convenient, and so you just tend to work more. And so, you and I have chatted about what does a 4-day work week look like? What does a 36-hour
Mm-hmm.
work week look like? How do we change the narrative for the accounting space and do it in a way that's not detrimental to service par excellence? And there are things
Mm-hmm.
like that we can start to explore and test and see what works. And that there are things like that we're certainly going to be leaning on initial hires to help us shape.
Totally. And I'm really excited to just experience or test those different options that we can redefine. And um, oh, you made me think of one thing in particular. Of course, I can't remember it. Oh, it was back to your comment of how you went 2 hours in your middle of your day. Um, it's little things like adding that to your calendar of like personal time, 2 hour block, 12 to 2 in the middle of a work day.
Yeah.
And if someone tries to book a meeting with you, the team members see that. They see that you're taking personal time as a founder, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I think, I block every morning. I have a 2 hour block of my personal gym prep day time, and that time is my time.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of little things that we can do to set the expectations with our teams, um, and they don't go unnoticed.
Yeah. And I think there are two elements to that are really important. One is not only blocking the time, but honoring it for yourself and making
Mm-hmm.
sure that other people honor it as well. And then the second thing is giving the employees, giving the team space and freedom to do that. We had a recent conversation with an individual who said, I just haven't had time to take my dogs for a walk, to get my doctor's appointments in. And it's like, wow, that seems so rudimentary from a culture standpoint to make sure your employees can do that. And so I feel like that's
Mm-hmm.
like base level. But then sitting in the position of making sure you're respecting and honoring those people's times is super important. And quite frankly, I don't do a great job of that. But also, I need to make sure that when that block is on the calendar for family time or whatever event that is, that I'm respecting that and not booking over that because there's an element of culture that's embedded in that from a leadership perspective too.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I mean, when you boil it down, there's really no task that one specific person has to do.
Yeah.
Um, you know, let's just say, for example, scoping and the scoping process. You're way better at that than I am, way better. But if you had something to do, I would take the call. Wouldn't do it as well as you, but it would get done. And I think recognizing that perfection isn't always attainable, that you can throttle that back a little bit and take the 80% to perfect, and
Yeah.
that's okay. Um, there's some quote about that where, if you train someone, they're only going to do it 80% to how you would do it. And
Yeah.
that's how you scale. That's how you grow. And it's how you maintain your own sanity.
Yeah. Perfect is the enemy of good. And people
Yeah,
try to achieve this perfect, and it's not worth the additional time and effort to get there most of the time. Now, we're accountants by nature, so we want to reconcile things down to the penny.
totally.
So it's something that we have to break internally. But one thing that you mentioned too is that the importance of redundancy in a culture, in an organization, is so important, because if you don't have redundancy, if you don't have proper documentation of how things get done, who accomplishes what, then when that one person, when that one individual as a single point of failure leaves, oh man, then transition is tremendously difficult. And you can achieve redundancies in multiple ways, but I think that's one thing we need to strive to do as we build out that culture.
Absolutely. And that can be challenging too, because again, we're up against an industry where there are cultures where if you don't have your silo and you have a role that someone else could do or take over, there's a risk of obsolescence that you might be on
Hmm.
the chopping block. And that's
Yeah.
a reality of a lot of companies. My husband's in tech, and uh, it, it's a cutthroat culture. So that's got to be part of our assessment and onboarding and identifying and vetting how willing people are to having this open book of policies, of process, of tasks, and then working with
Yeah.
one another to overlap a lot of those different deliverables.
Yeah, that's good. Um, a conversation I had recently with a firm out of Utah. He was saying, we are talking about business acquisitions, and he was saying, we haven't acquired any other firms because of culture. And it's interesting to me because they value their culture so closely that they fear that by bringing in another firm and acquiring a firm that doesn't have the same culture poses too much of a risk to their current team, that they just opt not to do that. And I think there's this innate value creation within a team's culture that, like, once you get to that point, you're locked in arms. You're like, this is how we're going to operate, and we feel really good in this space. That you start to make decisions based off of culture, like business acquisitions. And it was just so impactful to me to hear this individual say, "Hey, we didn't acquire that firm because they didn't have the right culture." It's like, oh, that is awesome. They're making decisions based on that.
I love that because you and I talk about that all the time of pursuing an acquisition. It's a great way to acquire a ton of clients at once. And I hadn't really thought about, I do think about culture because, but I'm thinking like we can work hard to change the culture,
Mm-hmm.
but is it worth it? And what risk is there that you can't change the existing culture and mesh everyone under the same umbrella?
Yeah.
I love that they did that.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, people are living it out, right? And so it's great to see
Mm-hmm.
examples of that. So today, with Full Send, what are the elements of our culture today that we're very proud of, and that we're going to continue moving forward with in the future?
Oh, it's tricky. I mean, I've been here, what, 5 months now? And I think what I really love um, is the collaboration that we have. We also have an employee who's based in the Philippines, and I talk to her for 30 minutes every morning, if not longer. And it's the time spent to identify everything that needs to get accomplished, talk through issues, and spend the time training. I think you and I do a very good job similarly with openness about tasks and deliverables and what I'm like, I don't understand this, help me walk through this. Um, so I guess what that boils down to is the training component. I think an investment in training to maintain the level of service that we're working so hard to develop and have that consistent standard across the board. If we don't invest in training and time to train, we will never achieve that.
Yeah.
Um, I think our balance is really healthy as well.
Hmm.
you and I both have identified that we have a lot of prospects coming down the pipe, and we want to get ahead of hiring before you and I are just totally overwhelmed and working way too
Yeah.
much. We'd rather get ahead of it and be prepared, have that time to train ahead of time before it gets crazy busy.
Hmm.
And obviously, that's going to eat into profits.
Yeah.
That's the only way it's going to work is to do that. And I think I would like to continue to have that mentality. I think it
Hmm.
might change over time in terms of how much, but I want to put people before profits
Yeah.
um, in a healthy way.
Yeah, I like that slogan a lot. People over profits, and it's one thing to say it. It's another thing
Mm-hmm.
to make decisions based on that. And we both have the mentality that that is something that's worth investing in. And to to your point, like it doesn't matter where anybody in the world is working for Full Send Finance, whether you're in the Philippines, in Brazil, in Canada, in Colorado, in maybe not California. We'll see if we hire there in Washington. Um, we have the same standards for client service, for culture fit, and hiring across the board. And so it's not a matter of saying, oh, well, we're just going to push all this work over here because it's cheap labor or anything like that. It's like, no, we're going to have a global workforce, and the standard is here for everybody. And
Mm-hmm.
that is something that we're going to have to lean into heavily as we kind of develop this approach, which I'm really excited about. If I flip to the fun side of things from a culture front, one of the ideas I had early on was like, how cool would it be to set up a fund where employees have access to money where they can do something that's full send to them? And so from day one, we've segmented a portion of our revenue in order to give back to employees and team members to have access to a pool of money that they can go do whatever is that's full send to them. And so for somebody like Stacy, that might be taking a portion of the funds and going on a mountain biking trip with her husband. For others, it might be, I use this example a lot, I don't know why, but somebody who's really into books and wants to go to a book fair in Houston. That's probably up somebody's alley. And it's like, great, that's awesome. Do what it is that's full send for you. Here's this fund because we want you to live your life. And that's super important. I think that will continue.
I'm so excited to really make that an event
Yeah.
where it's okay, everyone. And we haven't defined how to build the fund, how much each person gets. We have no idea. We're just setting money aside, and it'll eventually be part of the full send fund. But I think it would be so exciting to have like a full send day where grant employees that fund. We talk about how we're using it, and it's an event. It's something to look forward to, and it's something to
Yeah.
be proud of based on all of the work we've all collectively put in
Hmm.
to to do that thing. We've talked a little bit about also in-person meetings. When do we bring the team
Yeah.
together in person, and how often? And I think those are the type of things we'll want to work out. And I believe in the power of in-person connection. So I
Yeah.
definitely want to get our team together. Um, it's on the it's on the radar. It's just not yet defined of how frequently or who. Not sure.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of events, we're going to be hosting our first event this year, our inaugural Full Send Fall Bash, which we're super stoked about to bring the community together to support a great cause in First Descents and partner with them on this event. And, you know, when you're working with community, when you're working with nonprofits, when you're supporting great causes that really help impact the lives of others, it's a lot of fun. It's exciting, and so we're stoked to be able to do that on September 28th. If you're listening to this and want to be in the Denver area or live in the Denver Boulder area and want to come join us, of the 15 listeners we have today, come on up to Boulder. We'll get you an invite. Send us a note. But things like that, the in
that includes
person.
that in that includes mom. Mom. You're welcome
Yes.
to come.
Yeah. Mom, dad, aunts, uncles, because moms are definitely the ones listening to this right now. Maybe
Yeah.
the only two. um, but I think that'll be a really cool experience to just share that ethos, that culture that we're building with the broader community, with First Ascents and their organization as a nonprofit, and just to start to see the initial seeding of the culture and the impact on the community too.
Yeah, you just made me think about one piece that I love about building Full Send is, uh, our focus is accounting. That's what we do. But through Full Send, we're doing so much more where we're having an event. What accounting, if I've worked inside as a controller, we've never had an event that's put on by us that we own that allows us to come out behind our desk and interact with the community.
Yeah.
And you and I are going to plan to go to a bunch of trade shows. We want our team to be attending trade shows, and I think it also fills in this missing piece of bringing us out and accountants out into the wild and
Hmm.
allowing us to connect with partners, with industry thought leaders, and just be better accountants overall, better people. I'm really excited for that piece of Full Send and developing that into our culture as well.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, it's taking that culture, that ethos, that different perspective that we have to the masses. So it's a one-to-many relationship, and impact can be far greater when you do that. And to your point, there, not that I've seen many firms that have banger events like this. So I'm hoping for a good one. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun.
I'm very excited. Okay, we could talk a little bit about, we have the work-life balance, the culture, but how do we maintain a distributed workforce? How do we keep a culture strong when we're physically so far apart and only interacting over a screen? Um, I've had some thoughts on that. I don't know if anything comes to mind for you.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I remember on March 13th when I was about to go, March 13th, 2020, when I was about to fly out to a trade show in LA, the whole world shut down. Everybody went virtual. Fortunately for me, I was at an organization that was already virtual, and so transitioning wasn't very difficult. But there was still that piece of culture that we wanted to spice up, and so we did a bunch of like Jackbox virtual games and stuff like that on Zoom. But building culture starting in a remote world today in 23, it's challenging, and you want people to feel plugged in and supported. And I think one side of that is just communication. How do you communicate? Do you have expectations on how do you communicate, and what mediums you use for that? Because you also want to make sure you're not
Mhm.
taking advantage of people's digital space by blowing up their phone, their Slack, their email, Twitter, whatever. But I think setting clear boundaries around communication is going to be important, but also can foster good culture.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. I think it's very easy to be siloed, and um, you just it's harder to ask for help. It's harder to get that interpersonal working relationship down when you're so disconnected physically. My mannerisms, you can't feel how, when I'm sarcastic or
Yeah.
how the tone is. And one thing I really loved that we did at Sunday is, Sunday had about 100 employees, and every single morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Time for 15 minutes, there was a company wide stand up, which when I first started and I heard that that existed, I thought it was crazy to take, the prime thought working hour across the whole organization, taking that much time when you equate it to dollars. But what I found was that each day a different team would present and different people on the team. It was everyone eventually would just talk to the entire company over Zoom. And for one, it allowed you to put a face to a name,
Yeah.
hear thoughts from different people. It also gave everyone a platform to talk about what they were doing and working on day to day. So for accountants to hear product team, to hear to the designers, to hear
Hmm.
the marketing, to hear a little bit about what people are focused on and problems that they're facing or wins that they've had. That was a really cool, very short way to do that and build culture across the company. So I loved that. I think that was a really unique and fun way. It was also a very fun, informal, lots of kudos given and
Yeah.
things like that. So I think that was really fun.
And do you know why accountants wouldn't do something like that? Not a trick question, but accountants and leadership of accounting firms are going to sit there and they're going to build out a big spreadsheet and say, okay, well, if I've got 100 employees, I'm going to list out all their billable rates and what I have to pay them, calculate out 15 minutes of what that meeting is actually going to cost me, and then I'm going to nix it because it's a
Mm-hmm.
really expensive 15 minutes. Even though the addition to culture is probably far greater than any monetary spend that goes into the time for that meeting, that is probably going to be the single greatest thing that prevents accountants from doing something like that.
That was my whole thought when I heard it. I'm like, what? This is crazy. You have 100 people, CEOs, executive team, everyone, and then there's a prep time, right? It's usually you
Yeah.
spend time preparing for the meeting, and um, I obviously, as an accountant, had that same thought. However, having done it and knowing the impact it's had, I think it was one of the best builders of culture in a remote workforce that the company
Yeah.
had.
Hmm.
It's hard to
Well,
measure the benefit of culture.
it is. It is. But
Hard.
it is one of those things that you you can feel it working when it's working, and you can see it,
Mm-hmm.
and you can understand via the dialogue that's occurring amongst the team, between the leadership team and the rest of the team. You can get a sense for it really working well. And I like that example. And maybe in season 2, when we revisit this subject, we'll be talking about our daily stand up. That'd be pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Can't wait.
Well, I'm excited to continue working on this and focusing on it. It's certainly something that, as we build and develop Full Send, is front and center as it relates to bringing accountants in and helping them live their best possible lives in this industry. And so it's going to be a constant work in progress, and I will be very excited a year from now to look back on this episode and have this conversation again.
Same. Thanks for riffing. It's always fun to get the gears going, figuring out how we want to build it. And I can't wait to see
Yeah.
where we land.
That's good. Well, as we wrap here, you can find us at fullsendfinance.com or at Stacey Feldman, CPA, or Roman Villar, CPA on LinkedIn. Let us know if you've got any culture questions, culture thoughts, best practices. We want to hear them. But until next time.